In the retrospective, we've shown, I think we are showing this month, all of the films, including the very early ones, which are kind of commercial films from Taiwan of that time. And it's noticeable that in 1983, I guess it was, your career changed direction a bit. You produced and directed and even acted in a film called The Boys from Fenggui. Can you say something about that transition? I mean, I think you somehow or other you became more ambitious to make a different kind of film when you made The Boys from Fenggui. It's a lot different from the earlier ones, it seems to me. And I wonder if you can say why you changed, or what made you want to make a different kind of film?
The Boys from Fenggui， 这部片子是我一个最大的一个转变。It's a big change， 最大的一个转变。原因是我有一次去看我一个导演朋友，他在那边拍片，我去看的。然后我去到一个新地方呢，因为澎湖我那时候没去过，我去到一个新地方，我就上了 bus， 坐到最后一站。最后一站下来就是那个站就叫了丰贵东站，我就下来，什么人也没，然后一个小小的一个杂货店，非常小，一个老人在有个小小的一个那个撞球的，我就把那一段整个把它，因为我有笔记的习惯，就做了一个笔记。后来回来以后越想喜欢那个地方，感觉非常特别，因为都没人，然后那个地平线很平，所以后来就隔了1年吧，拍完小 B 故事，完了就拍了《风归来的人》。
So The Boys from Fenggui was literally a changing point in Hou Hsiao-Hsien's career. And he was at that time visiting a friend and in Penghu, right? And so it is an island outside of the main Taiwan island. And so it was the first time he visited that space. And so he decided to take a bus and then go all the way to the last stop in that, on that bus. And when he got off from that bus, he realized that the stop was called Fenggui Dongzhan, which is the east stop of Fenggui, which is the location. And he got off the bus and he found no one around. And he was really absorbed by that environment. He saw only an old man and a pool table. And so he was observing the old man at the pool table. He had a notebook in his hands and he jotted down some of his thoughts. That picture kind of stayed with him for a long period of time. And about a year later, after he finished the film that he was working on at that time, he decided to make a film which became The Boys from Fenggui.
But the style, it's not just the story was different, the style was different as well. Sorry, but you got to say something about this. In Boys from Fenggui, noticeably, you took the camera quite far back from the action. There are lots and lots of long shots from a distance. And also you keep the shot going, perhaps longer than you did before. So there was some change. I'm determined to push you to say something about this.
因为澎湖那个地方，它就是人非常少，然后你会感觉看的视野非常广，地平线非常广，那种感觉很奇怪，就是车也不多，人也不多，所以你在拍的时候，我记得我那时候就跟我的那个摄影师是跟我合作很久的，叫陈坤厚，他也是一个导演。我每次就说镜头远一点，再远，再远这样。所以他后来回到台湾的时候，他跟我那个剪接说，我脑子坏了，说我每个镜头都推那么远。其实是那个地方的生态，就是包括它的景物。还有人跟人的关系，因为他们是很少不多人的，那种感觉非常寂寞，阳光又很大的那种感觉，让我去 捕捉了一个故事放在里面，去捕捉那个地方。
So, Penghu is a very deserted place. And so when he arrived in Penghu, one thing that he was really impressed by was the horizon. He looked around and everything he saw was the horizon. He could see a really broad picture in his head. And so when he was working with his DP, Chen Kunho, and what he kept saying to him was that put the camera further down, like put it further away from the subject, and he kept asking him put it further and further and further, until when they went back to the editing room, the cinematographer literally told everyone, "Oh, I think Hou Hsiao-Hsien is crazy," but it's not because, of course, of craziness, but the idea is that he really felt that he could only represent that kind of environment, that kind of horizon, and the ecology and the relationship between human beings, because there aren't many people in that island. So the idea is that the intimate relationship between these people can only be represented from that kind of shot, and the sunshine of that place can only be represented that way.
Okay. Maybe we'll come back to this in the context of later films, because I'm not sure that's the whole answer, but it's an interesting first step, let's say. Now, after Boys from Fenghui, which really did change your career, I think, you made 3 films in a row, which were based on, well, one was based on your own life story, early life story. Another was based on, the other 2 were both based on life or memories of your 2 regular writing collaborators, one by Zhu Tianwen and one by Wu Nianzhen. I wonder if you can say why in the mid-1980s you decided the time had come to tell some life stories like this of real people, including yourself.
我刚开始拍电影的时候，都是拍商业片、喜剧，然后有很多歌，有新song在里面，非常卖钱。那时候是我的片子都是非常成功的，非常成功。然后就是从风柜开始，风柜开始整个改了，改变了以后呢，你其实你自己的成长背景跟自己会有很大的一个关联性，你就想拍自己的成长背景，所以才会有童年往事。那吴念真的他的成长背景就是恋恋风尘，童年往事恋恋风尘，其实就会从自己的经验、生活的经验开始着手，然后你越拍就越走到了一个胡同里面，就是写实，写实变成你最后变成你一直创作的一个最重要的一个基础，而且它会累积，因为你在写实的这个空间里面，你会看到更多可能你平常没有注意到的。那其实那里面其实它的写实其实是很动人的。比我们创造出来的戏剧性更真实、更动人，所以大概是整个是这样的一个方向，一个变化。
So, Hou Hsiao-Hsien originally made comedies, and also comedies with really good theme songs. So they were really entertaining. They made a lot of money, and so his producers were probably very happy. And then when he started to make the Boys from Fenghui, that changed his whole career and also his whole thoughts about filmmaking. And with the success of the Boys from Fenghui, what he started to do was to start paying attention to his own life experience, to his past. And that wasn't only his own change. It was also the change of his collaborators. For example, his screenwriters Wu Nianzhen. And so what happened was that he used his childhood as a raw material to make Tong Nian Wang Shi, which is a time to live, a time to die. And then Wu Nianzhen, who is the screenwriter, made another, basically wrote another film, Lian Nian Fengchen, which is
Dust in the Wind.
Dust of the Wind. And so, and the more he started to delve into his life experience, the more he found it interesting, because what he found truthful is the reality. The idea is that by representing reality on film, he really found it far more interesting and far more rich than the kind of script that he created out of nowhere. So he really found that by capturing reality on film, he really found that he could capture a lot of contingencies, a lot of things that he couldn't expect from purely writing a script and creating a script on his own. And he really found that reality itself is extremely touching. It really directly touches someone. It is something that is grounded, it is fundamental in his creative process and fundamental to his cinematic art.
Well, this is obviously the moment we should look at the beginning of Tong Nian Wang Shi. Time to live, time to die. Let's take a break for just 3 minutes, 4 minutes. This is the opening scene. Actually, for all the films we've chosen to excerpt tonight, I've chosen the beginning of the film because it's kind of easier that way. It means I don't have to spend hours explaining to you what's going on or who these people are. The film assumes nothing, so this is the beginning of the film. Now, the reason that Grandma is running through the streets calling for you as a little boy is because she wants to bring you back to the mainland, back to mainland China.
Yes.
And she seems to think, I mean, maybe it's her delusion or maybe she's just getting a bit old, but who knows, that she could walk there, that you just have to cross the bridge and go over there and over there. And she seems to have forgotten that you all came by boat and that it was quite a long way, and this doesn't somehow register with her anymore. I just wonder if that's true. Did your grandmother really believe that you could go back to the mainland like that?
Yes.
So everything that we see at the beginning of the film is basically, it's your voice as well, isn't it, narrating?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really is your family story.
Yes.
In precise detail. It's your voice telling it. And actually, the first time I met you was shooting that film, and I visited the shoot in Fengshan.
Yes.
And you were using the house that you actually grew up in as your location. So there's a further level of reality to this. This is actually the very house where these things happened originally. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
因为他那时候有到现场。
Yeah, Tony was actually on the set when he was shooting this film.
I actually made things a little harder for you because I understood almost no Chinese at that time, and I didn't understand what was going on. And when I saw your crew fussing about insects, moths and little flying insects circling around a light, I thought they were trying to kill them to get them out of the way. So I, being rather tall, stepped in and helped, which meant that the crew had to go out and look for more insects because you wanted insects. They were just trying to move them around a bit. We haven't mentioned yet that your turnaround, you said that after Boys from Fengwei, your ideas about film changed, but also ideas in Taiwan changed about film, because you were you were at the center of what some people thought of as quite a big movement. There were quite a number of young directors who started making films soon after you, and they made a rather different kind of film from the ones made before, and it became known as the Taiwan New Wave. And my impression is that there was quite a lot of solidarity between you guys at the beginning. I say guys because you were all men, as it happens. There were some very important women making contributions, like Zhu Tianwen, the writer, but the directors were all men, I think, at that time. There was a lot of solidarity, and it began with the kind of idealism that you find in many new wave movements. But that didn't last for all that long. It went on for perhaps 4 or 5 years before things scattered and dispersed. How did it feel to be part of that? Were you very conscious that there was some of like group solidarity with a group of like-minded people who all wanted to change cinema in Taiwan?
那个时候我们年龄都差不多，我们都是战后出生。战后出生就是我是1947年，杨德昌、Edward Young 跟我同年 ，Edward Young。然后柯一正呢，柯一正、万人他们最多小我们2岁，1949，我们1947嘛。其实大概都是战后出生的那一群。然后其实我们常常聚集在一起，在杨德昌的家，杨德昌的家聚集在一起。然后我记得他就是常常会讨论一些片子，然后会找到那时候是看什么，我也不知道，录影带看录影带，很多那时候的片子。其实那时候正好就是欧洲，法国新浪潮，德国新写实，新电影，德国新电影，然后意大利新写实。那时候我们一起看的非常多，那个时候的片子。
So he did feel that they were a group of people working together to construct and create this new wave together. And part of the reason was perhaps he and Yang Dechang were both born in 1947, and then Ke Yizheng and Wan Ren were born in 1949. So they really belong to the same generation. And so he still remembered that they would get together in Edward Young's home, and they would watch a lot of films, especially films from the French New Wave, from the New German cinema, from a lot of European films that were springing up at that time, and they were watching video at that time, and so and then they would discuss these films at Edward Young's home.
Why do you think it didn't go on? After a few years, it seemed to break up. Why do you think that happened?
So many people, so many, it's a good friend, like good friend. 大家一起非常要好。然后当你拍出来的片子会不同的时候，它会有不同的别人的看法，这个会影响到彼此之间，这个影响蛮大的。然后再加上每个人的出身背景不一样，你一直拍片拍下去的时候，每个人的会越来越分歧，路线会不太一样。有的人喜欢的部分跟，譬如杨德昌拍的东西跟我就不会一样，因为他是在台北长大的，我是在乡下凤山，所以这些都是最后会慢慢就。这个氛围就不见了。我想本来就应该这样，不然的话，我们要做到很老还一起嘛，是不可能的。
So he believes that when they started to make films, they began to. Originally they were watching films together and they really enjoyed their camaraderie together. But once they started to make films, they began to watch each other's films, and they began to realize that they had different opinions. And also they saw the world and saw cinema from different perspectives. And so, and the other thing was that the more they made films, the more they realized that they didn't really share the same backgrounds. For example, like Hou Hsiao-Hsien grew up in Fengshan, which was the countryside, and then Edward Young actually grew up in Taipei, which was the urban area. So they really found that they had very different opinions about life, very different perspectives on things that they would like to talk about in their films. And so he believed that, this is the way it is. This is the way it should be. Otherwise, they would need to work until they were very old. Yeah.
Now, I mentioned earlier that you took a small acting role in Boys from Fenghui. It's only one scene, it's like a cameo. But just before you made Time to Live, Time to Die, you played a big role. You played the main role, in fact, one of the two main roles, in a film for Edward Yang called Taipei Story. And I think you also produced it or co-produced it. Are you secretly wanting to be an actor? was directing a mistake? I mean, it was because actually there are other films of this period where you're also acting. I've seen them.
他说我
No. At beginning, it's like a theme song in university. 在我在念大学的时候，所以我那时候其实是很会唱歌。我从小就会唱歌，在树上很小的时候，那个五线谱我就拿了五线谱的歌本，我就可以唱。所以我很喜欢唱歌。在大学的时候参加过比赛，一上台没声音，后来就放弃了。那时候还是大学1年级的时候，已经在念电影了。
So his first passion was actually singing. And he learned how to sing when he was a kid, and he learned how to read music, like even when he was a child. And so when he determined to be a singer when he went into university. And so during the first year when he was in university, he joined a competition. He went onto the stage and he couldn't sing. And so as a result of that, he decided not to become a singer. And at that time, he was already starting to learn film that time.
Okay. This stage in this building has had many of the world's best directors, filmmakers, film people on it. I think you may be the very first one who has ever sat here with a CD of yourself singing as part of your track record. You can actually buy Hou Hsiao-Hsien Sings on a CD.
You got it done, right?
No, a CD.
Oh, CD. Yeah. Yes, I have.
Yes. After these more personal story films, the film Your Story, Wu Lianzhen's story, Zhu Tianwen's childhood memory in Summer at Grandpa's, you made a film or a group of films that people think of as another trilogy about Taiwan history, Taiwan's modern history. And it started with City of Sadness, continued with Puppet Master, and concluded with Good Men, Good Women. Again, can I ask you for a sort of general overview? Why did you decide to go from telling personal stories to telling the nation's story in a way?
其实 Tony 说的很有道理。我感觉所有的创作者，他刚开始的时候，他不自觉的可能会用自己熟悉的部分。这个熟悉的部分就是自己的成长背景。然后你拍了之后，你就会对这一块发生兴趣，就会对你的朋友的成长，吴念真的，或者是朱天文，还有他刚刚说的像杨德昌他们的，开始对你那个成长的这一块，开始发出兴趣。兴趣以后，你就很多细节都会出现。那以前年轻的时候你不觉得，你慢慢在拍片年龄大的时候，你会发现家庭的变化其实跟政治跟社会都有关系。你才知道我父亲为什么会从北部到南部啊，或什么种种。然后你再接触到这些现实面，最重要就是你开始拍自己的传记，开始接触到真实的一面。你这时候就会去探索，为什么会有白色恐怖，为什么会有2284事件，就台湾那时候，你就会去找那些资料来看。资料看了以后，你就很愤怒，就想拍，就拍2284事变，然后拍白色恐怖，就是其实是台湾那时候的国民政府来到台湾之后，在美国的保护之下，他们一起是等于是执行了白色恐怖，就是反共产党。这一串其实牺牲了非常多的，你越看越多，你就拍了。他拍了，其实那是假使在 以前的时代是很严重的。那我拍的第一个片子就是《A City of Sadness》，就是第一个，因为他在金狮奖得奖，所以政府没有办法，所以他可以在全台湾上映。他们本来剪掉一段，所有的媒体都攻，所以他们又拿不敢剪掉，所以基本上就是有一个 timing， 这个 timing 就是差不多也到台湾所有的人都开始理解，你必须去了解自己的过去。
So the most important thing is that as Tony mentioned, when he started to make films, the first thing he paid attention to was his own personal history. And once he began to explore his own personal history, he began getting interested in the histories of his friends. For example, Wu Nianzhen, Zhu Tianwen, and Yang Dechang, like Edward Yang. And so he began to make films about their personal histories. But then after that, he began to get interested. He began to see a lot of details from these personal histories. And not only that, he began to see how personal histories were indeed, or are in fact, constantly being connected to the political atmospheres, to the political situations and conditions of the time. For example, sometimes they may ask, well, why does one's father would move from the north to the south? What kind of political background kind of motivated that move? And he realized that he began to see what he calls 现实面, basically a reality, a face of reality, a facet of reality, or an aspect of reality. And it really attracted him to explore and to read more about Taiwan's history. For example, the White Terror, which was actually started soon after the nationalist government moved to Taiwan, which was an anti-communist movement, jointly basically supported by the American government. And then also he began to explore the February 28th incident, which was a large-scale massacre or large-scale suppression of the political movements of local Taiwanese people by the nationalist government of the time. And so he began to explore a lot of these ideas, and he began to get angry and frustrated by what he read. And so he started to make City of Sadness, 悲情城市. And so originally, the Taiwan government wouldn't allow the film to be shown, and then they wanted to cut a part of that film off the film. But the film won an award basically in the Venice Film Festival. So a lot of newspapers, radios, and television, a lot of media began to pressure the government to release the film in its integrity. And so for him, it was a kind of timing, a historical timing. It was also a time when the people in Taiwan began to question their own identities, their own history. They began to have that kind of interest, just like himself, to explore Taiwan's histories.
Forgive me for these, rushing ahead gracelessly, but time is pressing as always in these things. Tell me about Li Tianlu. Anybody who has followed your films through the retrospective will notice that this strange old man turns up playing a grandfather in Dust in the Wind, and then he turns up again playing a strange old grandfather in the next film, Daughter of the Nile. And then he turns up again as the patriarch of the family, the old and probably a little bit senile patriarch in City of Sadness. And then his story, his real life story, becomes the focus of the next film, The Puppet Master. He is in real life a puppet master, or was in real life a puppet master. He was probably a living national treasure, you could say, in preserving certain old folk traditions in Taiwan. Tell us about Li Tianlu. How did you meet him? Why did you decide to make an actor from him? And why did you decide to use his story for a film?
Li Tianlu是什么时候看的？Dust in the Wind，that film。
第一部。
对， 我那时候需要找一个就是吴念真他的因为《Dust in the Wind》是吴念真的 memory，找一个他的阿公，他的祖父，这种背景，这种比较像的。后来我有一个助导，叫什么名字记不得了，他就介绍说台大那个李天禄有时候会去表演，我就去见了李天禄，我感觉他太棒了。李天禄从小他就是这种木偶舞台戏非常从小开始的，所以我就邀请他来演《恋恋风尘》，演那个吴念真的祖父阿公。他简直是，你只要跟他讲 situation， 他就巴拉巴拉巴拉巴拉。那以前都是要事后配音的，就是要配音，那时候还没有新song。但是李天禄这种没办法配音的，他自己讲过，他自己也记不得的。所以这个是很难的，所以我那时候就开始把机器那时候 2C。还不是那个，就是还没有新song的时候，用棉被包起来，拍李天禄的部分，所以他的声音全部是他自己的声音。从那时候开始，你会慢慢对这种都是慢慢的啦，你会对写实、真实的故事、写实声音的真实，任何东西的真实开始要求。
So he first started to meet Li Tianlu when he was looking for the grandfather character in Dust in the Wind. And because Dust in the Wind is the story of the screenwriter Wu Nianzhen, and so he was looking around for the perfect person who could invoke that kind of feeling, who would look like the grandfather. And so his assistant director at the time introduced him to Li Tianlu, who was actually performing at the Taiwan University at the time, because Li Tianlu is a puppet master. And so he went to the performance, and he was extremely touched by Li Tianlu's performance, so he asked Li Tianlu to go to perform in the film, in Dust in the Wind. And so when he talked to Li Tianlu, he was extremely impressed. Like, with one suggestion, Li Tianlu was able to give like tons of other suggestions for him. And so he enjoyed their collaboration a lot. And not only that, at that time, because in Taiwan at that time, the protocol was to dub the soundtrack instead of syncing it. And so, but he found that Li Tianlu's lines simply couldn't be dubbed, because whatever he said, he couldn't even remember himself. And not only that, it was kind of like you couldn't really imitate his speech, like whatever he said. And so he decided to put a huge quilt around his camera and his recording equipment, and then started to shoot the film on location sound. That was a turning point for him, because he really began to really think deeply about what it means by representing reality. And not only in the picture, but also in sound, and also everything that is included in the cinematic experience.
Thank you.
As you got to know Li Tianlu and became very friendly with him, and he's a very salty character. I mean, it's not just that his language is hard to reproduce, it's that it's very filthy. I mean, he uses all kinds of swear words and shocking expressions. And he speaks a very strong Taiwanese dialect, which is hard to reproduce as well. But he's also, beyond all of this, he's a living witness to a period long before you were born, the years when Taiwan was colonized by Japan. So for 45 years, Japan was the colonial power in Taiwan until, from 1910 till the end of the war. And he lived through that. And I think that was also kind of important for you. But anyway, let's just, the next clip we have lined up is the beginning of the film about Li Tianlu, called The Puppet Master. Unfortunately, because of your producer of that time, it's become a quite difficult film to see. So this is perhaps a rare chance in the retrospective. If you haven't seen Puppet Master, I urge you to take the chance to see it in the festival, in the program, because it is a rare chance. Anyway, let's just look at the beginning of it. These are the opening minutes of the Puppet Master.
出生的代志啦，李天禄出生的代志。以前是男的没办法有钱可以娶媳妇的时候，他等于是女方出面哄揪的是这个意思，这样。
OK，
所以第一个小孩生男的应该是女方的姓。
So he explained that in the old days, if a man, the man's family wasn't rich enough to get a wife, and so the idea is that the wife's family would pay for the wedding and pay for everything. And it might be very common, well, at least in America, but not really during the imperial period. And so what happened was that the firstborn was supposed to be belonging to the wife's family. The firstborn should have the last name of the wife's family.
I couldn't help noticing in this clip that there are only 2 shots. There's a very long shot at the beginning, a long take of everybody milling around the table and looking at the baby and everything, followed by a second shot also focused on the baby. At the beginning with no voiceover, and then you bring in Li Tianlu's autobiographical memories or explanation about this family background. By this time, you've definitely decided to shoot a lot in long takes. Your style has really evolved, I think, and this is not just a question like in Boys from Fengwei or in Time to Live, Time to Die, of just seeing people from a distance. Here you're quite close to them, but you're holding the shot. Now, it seems to me that you're doing this for several reasons, but one of them is to give more prominence to the actors. Is that right?
那时候钱比较多了，因为拍的片子都成功，他都卖钱，所以钱比较多。钱比较多呢，我就想拍同步录音了。其实那时候拍《恋恋风尘》，其实已经是同步录音，但是用棉被盖起来的。我到拍City of Sadness 的时候，是真正用同步录音开始，但是那是很早。从那之后我都全部同步录音了，因为我已经受不了事后配音的这件事情，那种真实性已经是从那个北京城市开始。
所以基本上同步录音就影响到那个镜头。
对，因为你同步录音，然后那时候拍《City of Sadness》的时候，我记得是1000尺还是1000尺？1000尺的片子，以前都是400的，1000尺。我一次1000尺这样，差不多可以拍一个10分钟。所以你就一直拍，越拍越长。
So, well, he was saying that by that time he got bigger and bigger budget, and so he was able to make not only that he could make more films, but one very important thing, starting from Dust in the Wind, and thereafter, he really tried to pay attention to the sound, and he started to insist upon using location sound, synchronized sound. In Dust in the Wind, he was still using a big quilt, but by the time he made The Puppet Master, he was really using professional location sound equipment like the Nagra. By this time, City of Sadness, he could not stand having post-production dubbing at all. And so, and he really found that the choice of using location sound changed the way he conceived and constructed the shot. And one particular reason was that at the time, before, with bigger budget, he was able to buy longer film stock. And so originally he was using 400 feet film stock, and now by the time he made City of Sadness and Puppet Master, he was able to use 1,000 Feet magazine. So at that time, he was able to keep shooting for 10 minutes. Yep.
And you did. I'm sorry, this is so graceless, but again, I have to rush on. I think we've established pretty clearly that you have an informed interest in history, both in your own history, the history of your friends and your circle, and in the history of Taiwan itself, because those three films in the trilogy do add up to a kind of picture of Taiwan in the 20th century, from Li Tianliu's beginnings at the beginning of the Japanese period, right through to the 40s, the 50s, the post-Japanese period, the anti-communist purges, the witch hunts, all this, everything. The three films cover all of this very interestingly, and in a way that I think is quite revelatory, because I think when you were going to school, this wasn't in the textbooks. I think you had to find it out for yourself, and you're telling a history that has not really been told publicly many times. However, this was not my question, sorry. The question is present day. If we look at your films, there are quite a few scattered here and there that try to deal with present day life and its contradictions, its problems, its frustrations, and so on. The first one probably was Daughter of the Nile. And then you came back to it in films like Goodbye South, Goodbye, in the present day scenes in Good Men, Good Women. And I can see that, alongside your interest in history, you have a compulsion to try and deal with people of the present. I wonder if you can talk about that dichotomy, those two sides to you. 可以吗？
他们都没听到哦，讲得好小声哦。其实呢，你刚开始拍的时候，就像我说，我拍风柜，或者是拍我自己的 memory 童年往事，你会往真实这一块，就是你记忆中的一种写实，真实去拍。你越拍停不下来了，你对真实开始有一种感觉，这种感觉。不是你以前拍的很多什么那种就是溜溜了他啦，风儿替他走，那种完全不一样的。它变成一个真实的，就是你变成你在拍的对象或者故事或者这个演员的演出，你已经要求他要写实，要有一种真实的味道。从这个方向是我感觉是改变我最大的。我感觉我假使脱离这个，我不会拍了，我没办法拍，所以我变成一定要从写实这条路上走。你不管是拍过去的，你要去研究，到后来我拍了很多其他的片子，基本上已经是往这条路了。就是你家没有这个，甚至于我这次拍了一个唐朝的，我都要去理解，因为。真实变成了我一个创作最大的一个动力，跟吸引我的一个 situation， 一个情境，这种真实的情境，你想去做到这个。
So from the very first film, basically from the very time he made The Boys from Fenghui and thereafter. One thing he was interested in the beginning was the reality of the memory, 记忆真实. Basically, it's a kind of memory of his past, memory of his friends, even memory of the nation, but it is a kind of reality of that memory. But then the more he delves into the memory, the more he is beginning to look for reality itself. Basically, he begins to not only ask for reality in the subject matter or in the represented world, but also the performance of the actors. The actual narrative, how that narrative is being constructed, has to be part of a real situation. In fact, those performances and those stories are realities in themselves. And so, he really found that became a path for him to keep going. And that was the only way he could understand how to make a film. And so even when he was making The Assassins, one thing he wanted to do was to go back to the books and try to find reality in that piece of history. And so reality, now, like I want to use the word realism, but realism is not really the word he was using, 写实, like representing reality or reality itself is really the creative force behind him. And he really, in each film, he wanted to create a situation. It is not just a representation, it's a situation.
The films I mentioned, where you look at present-day Taipei life, it can't be a coincidence that all of them center on women. In each case, the protagonist is a woman, a young woman. And that's been true in other films too. It's true in Café Lumière, for example. It's true. But it's... why women? Your men are nearly all gangsters, right? You obviously, I mean, we won't go into this now because it would probably be embarrassing, but you clearly have some kind of affinity with bad boys, with Liu Mang. Your women are less compromised morally, let's say, or sometimes they're compromised morally as well, but anyway, you go for women who on the whole are on the fringes of this man's world, and I'm just wondering why women, mostly? Or why do you choose to set these present-day stories by focusing on a woman protagonist?
Because my father's death is very early. 我父亲去世的时候，我才12岁。然后家里有姐姐，都是我姐姐，还有我妈妈，还有我的祖母。这个当然是会有影响的，绝对会有影响。然后我那时候高中，我第一个爱慕的对象是住在城隍庙旁边的一个女孩。那时候那个女孩才，我看她念初中，差不多初3左右。她念商职的一个女孩，在城隍庙旁边的一个房子。我每天都去车站等她，然后跟在后面很远，就童年往事那样，等她回家。她的那个样子的气质，我不知道为什么我就喜欢。然后后来我其实经过很长时间呢，其实我在年轻的时候看了非常多的日本片，日本的女子的样子，其实有影响到我对女人的一个感觉。也看了很多小说，我看了非常多的小说，看了非常多的电影。Anyway， 最后我就感觉女人就是最美。女人这个美不是漂亮而已，她的那个韧度跟男的完全不一样啊，那个韧性非常的大。所以其实我是蛮崇拜的。所以我在我后来的片子里面，其实这些女性角色对我非常重要。像辛素芬，我会碰到她是在一个戏院的门口，她那时候才高3，她念商的3年级，高3，18岁吧。我看了，哇，太漂亮了。但是我不好意思，前面去我是导演的时候不敢讲，一直跟了很久，跟到已经脱离那个环境很久了以后，我忍不住了，我就过去，我就拿我的身份证给他看，我说我是侯孝贤，我是一个导演，我能不能留你的电话啊？因为我想找你拍片子这样，他就留了，留了以后，后来他家里是反对的，完全反对，你知道，但是他很坚持。所以那个就是A City of Silence 开始的。然后我的 choice 很准确，你知道，他的样子跟那个是来自于他的从小的家庭教育，你知道。从那时候开始，我就迷上了女性角色。 几乎每一个女性角色，对我来讲都是非常非常动人。
So his father passed away at the age of 12, and so he was being brought up with his sister, his mom, and his grandmother. So to some extent, that was probably an influence that he was being brought up with women. And when he was in high school, as a matter of fact, not even in high school, junior high school, he met his first love, and which was next to a temple, Changhuang Miao, which is next to a temple devoted to the god of the district ghost, if you want to get more specific, and he saw the girl, and he was really deeply attracted by her aura. And so he remembered how much he fell in love with that girl's aura. And he watched a lot of Japanese films and also read a lot of novels. And when he was watching Japanese films, he was really attracted to, once again, the aura of Japanese women. And he really found that women are the most beautiful want to be politically correct. Women are the most beautiful people.
Yes.
And he doesn't really mean just pretty or beautiful in the conventional sense. She found in women flexibility, perseverance, and also strength. These are the beauty of women. And so the idea is that when he was looking for the actor who performed in City of Sadness, what he did was the young woman was only 18 years old. And so he also saw her next to a temple. And so he was basically tailing her. It was kind of perverse. But after a while, he was really afraid because he was only 18, and so he finally couldn't stand it anymore. He walked up to the young woman and presented her his ID card to prove that he was indeed Hou Hsiao-Hsien. And he was just like, I'm a director, I really want your phone number, and can you act in my film? And so, so for him, he is always very attracted by women characters. He is always very interested in building them and looking for them, in fact.
You've developed a relationship, a professional relationship, with the actress Hsu Qi, who is Taiwanese originally but lives in Hong Kong and has acted mostly in Hong Kong films. She acted for you first in Millennium Mambo, I think, and since then in 3 Times, and again in The Assassin. She is the assassin. And you've done wonderful things with her, I think. Let's look at the beginning of Millennium Mambo. And like the other 2 clips we've looked at, this has voiceover at the beginning to introduce the situation and the character. But it's different this time because it's a voiceover from the future. This is a film made in 2001, and the voiceover comes from 2011. 2011 is now already past, but if you remember, it was quite strange to see this film in 2001 and to have a voiceover from the future coming at you. Let's look at it, just the first few minutes. Now, I know that you have, on occasion in Taiwan, you've been accused yourself, like that magician, of being a slave to foreign fashion. Some of your critics in Taiwan have accused you of making films that pander to Western tastes. It seems a bit far-fetched if you know how difficult it is to get films like yours distributed in Western countries, but that is what the Taiwan press says. And I wondered if there's something rather wry and self-referential about this magician and having this kind of comment thrown at him, albeit jokingly.
没想那么多了。
He didn't think too much.
千禧年的时候，因为我成立了一个公司啊，这个公司是很多人投资的，因为那时候流行那个叫什么网络公司啊，那个而且那时候电影开始有数位，开始有数位， 数位的意思就是它的我现在都记不得了。反正数位呢，我那时候就想说，好，我成立一个公司，我可以拍一个故事。这个故事有很多角色，很多女的角色，然后延伸出去有更多女的角色，然后以后你就一直拍一直拍，然后有个母细胞一样，这里个原始几个角色，然后变成很多故事，各种故事，各种故事这中间也有可以连接的，然后呢就在网络上，你做了一个网络公司，就把这个图像都全部越拍越多就出去了。然后把音乐什么东西都放进去，让他们自己去喜欢怎么剪接怎么剪接。我那时候最早成立那个网络公司是想这样做的，后来发现根本没用，所以我就拍了，我这个开头就拍这个，那群女孩子的关系，然后慢慢扩散，越来越大，越来越大。你就可以变成非常多的影片，然后你可以上网去自己找一个角色，把它自己连接起来一个故事，这样。那时候是想这样，那后来我想我是在做梦，那不行，所以后来就没有执行，所以这个片子的开始是这样。
So around the year 2000, he actually started up an internet company. I think at that time it was still called a web, like a World Wide Web company. And so at the same time, digital technology was beginning to emerge. And so, so his original idea was to use his web company to start making multiple stories. So starting from one female character, and then just like a cell, it splits into two female character stories of two different characters, and then multiple female characters. And so it became kind of like an assemblage of female characters, an assemblage of stories. And so you could actually put music into it, and then and then the web users would be able to go online and then start picking a story and then reconnect these stories together. And after a while, he realized that, well, I'm just dreaming, and it wasn't really possible at that time. So he decided to make a film, make this film, which was based on this original concept.
Okay. Now, I was going to ask you about drugs now, but if we don't open it to the audience, there won't be time. So I better not ask you about drugs and instead say, ladies and gentlemen, it's your turn.
那是吴念真真实的故事。他
That's
去金门当兵了，他每天写信给他的女朋友，那个邮差每次去送，结果他女朋友就爱上这个邮差了。
That was a real story of Wu Nianzhen, the screenwriter, and he really did write a lot of story. Basically, write a love letter every day to the girl he loved, and eventually the girl got all the mails from the postman, and then she fell in love with the postman.
Really. 千禧年是一个，我想大家在经过千禧年都知道，它其实是很狂热的一个 step 那个时候非常狂热。那拍《海上花》呢，是因为本来想拍什么？我本来想拍郑成功传。郑成功传呢，因为他妈妈是日本人，所以他爸爸接到大陆以后，送他去南京上太学。那太学南京有秦淮河，秦淮河的意思就是有一些生计。就靠声音唱的这种生计，在跟文人一起。那为了考据这个，就去看《海上花》这本小说。《海上花》这个是清朝最后一届的，他们要去考那种清朝考举人啊、考进士的一个没考上回来以后写的。他写的其实就是他童年成长的过程，《海上花》。《海上花》就是最高级层的，就是那些 文人喜欢去的，叫长山书寓里面。我看了那个本来是 research 的，一看了着迷，我就改拍《海上花》，《海上花列传》。海上花就是找了这些女生很多女演员来演。刚才这个问题是什么？
就是有什么启发到你，就是从海上花转到拍那个千禧曼波那种现代。
What was the question? That was the...
海上花拍完之后，其实那时候台湾整个风气开始流行 techno。我很多朋友其实，在 techno 里面，他们就是主持音乐，像林强他们都有的techno 这种东西，在那时候是刚开始，所以我也会去那个地方。哇，我感觉那些人那个声音强大到这个程度，然后每个人在那边，我感觉很有意思。我感觉好像是，你会感觉千禧年对台湾而言，好像是一个新的一个开始，你知道？我就想拍这个 techno。新的世代，你知道，所以才会找上舒淇。那时候我是在舒淇是在电视上看到她一个 CF， 她那时候在香港，因为我感觉这女孩子很棒，你知道，我就联络探听，知道她是属于我一个朋友，一个编剧，也叫导演，叫什么？反正我跟他很熟了，我就打电话去了，他就 OK 就答应了，然后他就回来了。那个舒淇就回台湾来跟我在公司见面。他回来，他那种样子是，我知道你是导演，很有名，但是又怎样？他那无形中有一种气，你知道？我感觉这个女孩子好过瘾。所以我就开始跟他合作到现在。所以我刚刚在看这个，其实我在想，我合作的片子里面女性角色还蛮重要的，辛淑芬呐，像舒淇啊，中间还有谁？反正我自己感觉啦，你知道？所以为什么会插到这里去了？
So, well, first of all, if you could remember, for those of you who had been there, the millennium was a huge time around the world, and so definitely that was the beginning of the inspiration for him to make Millennium Mambo. But he went back to the very beginning of making Flowers of Shanghai, Hai Shang Hua, and originally he wanted to make a biopic of Zhang Chenggong, and Zhang Chenggong was the person in the mid 17th century between the Ming and Qing empires, and he actually fought against the Dutch colonizers and won, and then basically became almost like a father of Taiwan at that time. And so he was doing research, and it's very interesting because Zhang Chenggong, the historical figure, had a Japanese mother and a Chinese father. And so his Chinese father wanted Zhang Chenggong to go to Nanjing, and in Nanjing there were many songstresses, and it was a Qinghuaihe, which is a beautiful river where you can actually hire, they are not prostitutes, but they were basically being for hire to sing songs for you, to entertain you. It was a very intellectual and beautiful and prosperous kind of environment. And so he was really attracted, he wanted to do more research into it. And so he started to read a book written by a Qing intellectual, a very wealthy Qing intellectual, who participated in the last imperial exam of the Qing dynasty. The Qing dynasty was from 1644 to 1911. And so this person participated in the exam, he failed, and then he decided to write a novel. And this novel was really about him growing up among these songstresses in Shanghai, Nanjing, the Qinghai area. And so he was obsessed with this. So he eventually, instead of making Zhang Chenggong's biopic, he decided to make a film about this novel, which became Flowers of Shanghai. After that point, he finished that film, and then around 2000, 2001, techno was a huge thing in Taiwan. And so a lot of his friends were also DJs, and so he was also invited to a lot of these nightclubs and discotheques where he would actually see these techno people. And he was really obsessed with people like dancing around and shaking their heads, and he was overwhelmed by the music of like the techno music. And so he really believed that techno music represented a kind of new era for Taiwan's youth. And so he decided to make a film about this new era. And he then saw Shu Ti from a TV commercial, and he was really interested in her persona. And so he called the manager, who happened to be a really good friend of his, who was a director. And so Shu Ti, at that point, was living in Hong Kong. She's still living in Hong Kong. And then she flew back to Taiwan to see Hou Hsiao-Hsien. And at that point, Shu Ti walked into his office, and Shu Ti said, well, I know that you're a big director, you're a very named director, but so what? And so he was really attracted by that. There was a kind of aura, once again, in that kind of personality. So he decided to collaborate with her, and from that point on until, of course, The Assassin. Yeah.
我基本上是我的场景要拍的场景，你不管是现实的，或者是你自己设计好的，我弄好了以后，然后我的摄影师会把光弄好、打好，然后演员之前他看过剧本，我是不捋后手的，从来不捋后手。我不捋后手，然后让演员自己进去，然后他们都知道应该说什么，然后就一直拍，从来中间不会去跟他们讲说你们要怎样，没有，然后他们爱怎么演怎么演，我也不知道会发生怎样，然后你这样一直拍一直拍，人家感觉不好，你就 OK， 隔天会不会重拍？会，但是不是马上重拍，隔天又拍一个新的。新的拍完好不好没关系，然后隔几天以后又重回来拍那个，他们就知道没演好了，继续演。那继续演会怎样？不怎么样，还是一样这样。你这样不好，我还会再来第三次，什么时间不知道。所以他们也习惯了，而且我从来不捋后手，从来没有什么捋后手，没。他们自己看了剧本，自己知道角色是什么。我只是安排一个 situation。一个状态给他们进去，那他们进去有时候会跟我原来的想法，或者原来他们想演的会有点不太一样，他们自己慢慢就会调整。后来他们越来越 relax， 他们就很容易进入到那个角色了，基本上是这样。
So first of all, he would design a scene, whether it is on location, like which is from reality, or a set that he designs, and then of course the director of photography would go in and light the set. He never rehearses with his actors. He would get the set set up, and then he would ask the actors to enter the set and then start performing. And he would also not interrupt the performance, and he would shoot the scene, and then basically he would ask the actors, sometimes ask the actors to do it again. But the most important thing is that if he really doesn't like a scene that he has just shot, instead of retaking it right away, he would actually wait. He would actually come back the next day, ask the actors to play a new scene, and then it doesn't matter whether the new scene is good or not. He would then set up the old scene and then ask the actor for a retake. At that point, the actors would know that, oh my God, like I didn't do a good job. So they would perform again, and he never rehearses, but would only would only set up a condition a kind of situation for the actors to enter. And gradually, sometimes it would take 2 or 3 retakes. The actors would begin to start synchronizing or harmonizing their thoughts with his. And they would also be changing their thoughts in the process. And gradually they would relax, and eventually they would enter the kind of reality that they all aim for in the first place.
Yep. I'm sorry, we got to stop. We're out of time. I'm sure, and Hou Hsiao-Hsien has borne up heroically, considering the state of his lungs and his throat. But
no problem.
No problem, really?
Don't worry about it.
你太强. Anyway, I'd like to thank him for rising from his sickbed to come and join us this evening. I'd like to thank Victor for translating, and I'd like to thank you for coming to listen. Thank you.